This is Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore. The headlines. President Trump vows to pull the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear deal and hit Tehran with crippling sanctions.
The fact is, this was a horrible, one-sided deal that should have never, ever been made. It didn't bring calm, it didn't bring peace, and it never will.
The EU says it is determined to preserve the agreement, but Iran insists it could start enriching uranium without limitations.
I'm Kasia Madeira in London, also in this programme. High hopes for a different nuclear deal as the North Korean and Chinese leaders meet again. And Indonesia's plastic problem floating into the food.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Glad you could join us. It's 8 in the morning here in Singapore, 1 a.m. in London, and 8 in the evening in Washington, D.C., where President Trump has formally withdrawn the United States from the Iran nuclear agreement. He didn't hold back, calling the deal horrible and one-sided. It means economic sanctions will soon be reimposed on Tehran. Only Israel and Saudi Arabia welcomed the move. Other nations have condemned it, and the European Union says, as far as they're concerned, the accord still stands. Our North America correspondent Nick Bryant has more from Washington.
With a flourish of his presidential pen, Donald Trump has inked into history one of the most muscular pledges from his America First campaign. One that delivers a potentially fatal blow to the signature foreign policy achievement of his predecessor Barack Obama. One that could put the United States on a collision course with Iran.
The fact is, this was a horrible, one-sided deal that should have never, ever been made. It didn't bring calm, it didn't bring peace, and it never will. Therefore, I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
In one of his toughest speeches yet, he said he'd reimpose the highest level of economic sanctions against Tehran.
America will not be held hostage to nuclear blackmail. We will not allow American cities to be threatened with destruction. And we will not allow a regime that chants death to America to gain access to the most deadly weapons on earth. Today's action sends a critical message. The United States no longer makes empty threats. When I make promises, I keep them.
The nuclear deal was struck in 2015 between Iran and 6 world powers, including the US, UK and Russia. Iran agreed to limit its controversial nuclear energy program, which international powers feared could lead to the development of a nuclear weapon. In return, stringent economic sanctions were lifted, enabling Iran to sell more oil to other countries and trade more efficiently. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani delivered an almost instantaneous response, saying his country was preparing to restart uranium enrichment, key for making both nuclear energy and weapons.
I have ordered the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran to be ready to start the enrichment of uranium at industrial levels. We will wait a few weeks and speak with our allies. All depends on our national interests.
European architects of the deal, present at its creation 3 years ago, tonight gave a very grim-faced response.
The European Union is determined to act in accordance with its security interests and to protect its economic investments. The nuclear deal with Iran is the culmination of 12 years of diplomacy. It belongs to the entire international community. It has been working and it is delivering on its goal, which is guaranteeing that Iran doesn't develop nuclear weapons.
But praise from America's closest Middle East ally.
Israel thanks President Trump for his courageous leadership, his commitment to confront the terrorist regime in Tehran, and his commitment to ensure that Iran never gets nuclear weapons. Not today, not in a decade, not ever.
From Barack Obama tonight, a rare public rebuke of his successor. He called Mr. Trump's decision misguided and a serious mistake.
This will make America much safer. Thank you very much.
But Donald Trump is unapologetic. For him, it's promise made, promise kept. Nick Bryant, BBC News, Washington.
Well, for more analysis of President Trump's announcement, I spoke to our Washington correspondent, Chris Buckler.
If you look at the words that he has used about this agreement today, he has left nobody in any doubt about what he thinks about it. A nuclear blackmail, decaying and rotten, an embarrassment. Words very much aimed at Americans, also aimed at Israel, and actually aimed at Tehran as well. But also listening will be those European leaders who fought so hard to try to save an agreement that they feel is imperfect, has got problems with it, has got flaws, but ultimately did bring calm. Now, Donald Trump argues very clearly that that is not the case. He says it still didn't lead to calm in the region. The reality, though, of removing this deal is it has raised tensions there, and that is going to be a concern for all those leaders going forward, and it will ultimately be a concern for the White House as well.
What's interesting is that opinion polls show that actually Americans predominantly were in favour of staying in the deal. So what does the president have to gain? Is he just simply ripping up everything that the Obama administration had put into place?
There's no doubt that Donald Trump is somebody who was never a big fan of this deal, and although Barack Obama praised it very heavily, felt it was a high point of his presidency, Donald Trump led a campaign in which he made clear that he was going to scrap this deal if he got into power. So he is following through in many ways on his promises.
Chris Buckler there in Washington. Will be speaking to somebody who was involved in that Iran deal a little later here on Newsday. But first of all, let's bring you up to date with some of the day's other stories. The man who led weeks of protests in Armenia has addressed his supporters in the capital, Yerevan. It follows his election as Prime Minister. Nikol Pashinyan promised that human rights would be protected and that corruption and election rigging would end. Tens of thousands of people came out to celebrate in the city centre, and the BBC's Rehan Dimitri was there.
When the Armenian parliament voted for Nikol Pashinyan to become this country's next prime minister, there was an explosion of happiness here in the Republic Square, and people now are dancing, they're waving flags, they can't hold back their joy.
Facebook has banned foreign advertising linked to Ireland's referendum on liberalising its abortion laws. Critics had warned that campaigns by well-funded US groups could be decisive in the vote later this month. Facebook says that its integrity tools can verify if the advertiser is based in the country. The English football team Leeds United have arrived in Myanmar for an end-of-season tour. The club are scheduled to play 2 friendly matches as they seek to build a fan base in the country, but they've come under intense criticism from rights groups who feel that the visit is inappropriate given the persecution of the Rohingya minority. Now, this picture is Picasso's Le Marin. It's a self-portrait, and it is expected to fetch $70 million at auction in New York shortly. It's just one of a number of works of art that are going on sale from the Rockefeller collection, and that is thought to be the biggest single private collection to go under the hammer. All the proceeds, and they are expected to fetch more than $500 million, will go to charity.
Voting just got underway a few minutes ago in Malaysia's general election. This is one of the most hotly contested polls in the country's history. On one side, there's Malaysia's scandal-plagued Prime Minister Najib Razak hoping to secure another term. On the other side, his former mentor and the country's ex-Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, who's made a surprise return to politics at the age of 92. Joining us now is our Southeast Asia correspondent, Jonathan Head, joining us from outside a polling station in Petaling Jaya in the capital of Kuala Lumpur. Jonathan, it looks like a very busy polling station. The storyline here is about the incumbent versus his mentor, and this is shaping up to be one of the closest fought parliamentary elections since independence.
Yes, that looks likely, Rico. I mean, it's hard to know how accurate opinion polls are. It's been a very hard-fought race. It's become quite personal, of course, with Dr. Mahathir entering as the opposition candidate, a campaign replete with extraordinary ironies. When you think that Dr. Mahathir is now in partnership with Anwar Ibrahim, the jailed leader of the opposition, whom he originally jailed in the 1990s, his great bitter rival, and is now trying to unseat his one-time protege, Najib Razak, who of course is the Prime Minister. In this area and in many urban areas, there's no doubt there's a very strong appetite for change, a sense that after 61 years, people who've been lining up here have been saying, this is our chance. But it's quite a different picture when you get out into rural areas, and they are overrepresented in Parliament, far more seats in rural areas compared to the population. There, the government's record of supporting particularly ethnic Malays and the sort of inclination to stick with what they know may very well count in the government's favour. On top of that, the opposition has made a number of complaints, as it has in the past, but particularly this so, about how unfair the playing field is, the way in which constituency boundaries have been redrawn, the way in which voter registration is managed. Lots of different complaints that we've seen 6 opposition candidates disqualified on what seem like quite small technicalities. So they believe they're fighting an uphill battle, but there's no doubt, certainly it's a very tight contest and quite likely tighter than the election 5 years ago, which was already the most competitive we've seen in Malaysia.
Thank you so much for updating us on the Malaysian elections. Jonathan Head, outside a polling station in Petaling Jaya in Kuala Lumpur. You're watching Newsday on the BBC, live from Singapore and London. Still to come on the program. We travel to Indonesia to find out how plastic waste enters the food chain. Glad you're staying with us. This is Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore.
And I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Our top stories: Donald Trump pulls the United States out of the Iran nuclear deal, calling it defective to its core.
As the North Korean and Chinese leaders meet again, is the Korean nuclear deal still on track? And it seems everyone can't get enough of those incredible pictures from the Hawaii volcano. Here's a view inside the crater itself, the story popular on bbc.com/news. Let's now take a look at some of the front pages from around the world, and we start off with the Japan Times, and it wonders if the Olympics could provide a sales boost for the traditional kimono. Well, the garment has been losing the race against the modern attire, but designers hope the Tokyo Games will get people reaching for the robes yet again. Let's now turn the page to the China Daily, and it looks at a group of young people who are certainly keeping their eye on the ball. They're part of a summer camp aiming to create the ball boys and girls of the future. Some will even test their skills in major tennis competitions. And finally, you have the international edition of the New York Times, and musicians normally hope to get you dancing, not dozing off. But the paper reports on a concert that's putting audiences to sleep. The 8-hour lullaby was engineered with the help of scientists to offer a relaxing night. Listeners are even provided with a mattress to help them snooze. That's the concert I need. All right, moving now to trending, and Kasia, spider powers are sparking discussions online.
They sure are, Rico. This will wake everybody up because this is a story that's trending. It's about spiders, and if you don't like them, look away now, because scientists have trained this spider to jump on demand. This is Kim, and she can leap 6 times her body length from a standing start. Just put that into perspective, humans can only manage around 1.5 body lengths. Unlocking the secrets of her incredible leaps, scientists hope to build a new generation of robots inspired by nature. There she goes.
Love that slow-mo leap. Moving on now to other world news developments as everyone had their eyes on the Iran nuclear agreement. More diplomacy on the potential deal involving North Korea. First, news that Kim Jong-un had made another trip to China to meet President Xi Jinping. Then it was revealed that the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is once again heading to Pyongyang for talks. The BBC's Stephen McDonnell is in Seoul, and I asked him if Mr. Trump's withdrawal from the Iranian nuclear deal could impact the negotiations over North Korea.
Well, this has the potential to throw enormous pressure on that meeting between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. I mean, imagine you're the North Koreans. You're going to potentially do a deal with the United States to give up your nuclear weapons in exchange for who knows what. And what guarantees would you have that this government or some future administration in Washington might renege on that deal? So I think it is going to be at the forefront of the minds of the North Koreans when they're going into that meeting, said to be in the coming weeks, with the United States President.
Of course, you also have this second meeting in Dalian, China, between Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, there they were. I mean, yesterday and the day before, the leaders of North Korea and China, you can imagine they knew that this announcement was coming from the United States. You can bet they were talking about it. Now, this shows that China, which, unlike the situation with Iran, is a major nuclear power, which is offering, I guess, a shield to North Korea. And you can see here that Xi Jinping is trying to re-inject himself into this whole process and also to rebuild relations between those two countries. And you would love to know what Xi Jinping said to Kim Jong-un in terms of that Iran nuclear deal and the likelihood that you could rely on the US to uphold its end of the bargain following such a deal. For example, if the US was to say, we'll reduce troop numbers on the Korean Peninsula in exchange for you giving up your nuclear weapons, well, you know, from the point of view of the North Koreans, they don't care which president they'd be doing that deal with. They'd just be thinking, you know, that's a deal I have with Washington.
Steve McDonald there speaking about the North Korean nuclear deal. Let's bring the focus back to Iran. Donald Trump, of course, pulling the US out of the Iran nuclear deal. From Washington, we can speak to Thomas Countryman, chairman of Board of Directors at the Arms Control Association. Thomas, you were also the former US Assistant Secretary of State for International Security and Non-Proliferation. You were involved with the Iran nuclear deal under the Obama administration. You know an awful lot about the minutiae detail of it. Was it perfect, or could it have honestly been improved?
No, certainly there is no such thing as a perfect multilateral agreement. There were 7 countries that were negotiating this deal. It succeeded in addressing the most immediate concern that the U.S. had about Iran, which was its intention to enrich uranium and potentially to pursue nuclear weapons. And it stopped that pursuit of nuclear weapons permanently, not for a limited time. It did not seek to address every other issue that the United States has with Iran, just as all of our long and successful arms control agreements with the Soviet Union and with Russia did not attempt to address every single disagreement that we had at once. It succeeded in what it set out to do, and it also laid a basis, if the U.S. and others respected it, to address all the other concerns we have about Iran's unsavory behavior.
Now, your association has said that Donald Trump's actions are an irresponsible act of foreign malpractice. The president has said that this deal didn't bring peace in the region. He's got a point there, hasn't he?
There has been no deal that has brought peace to the Middle East since the Camp David agreements 40 years ago. That was not the purpose, to resolve every issue at once. It is a false criticism that the president has made, and there is no indication that Iran has violated this agreement.
You've got Benjamin Netanyahu saying that the deal didn't reduce Iran's aggression. He says it dramatically increased it, and we are seeing this across the Middle East. President Trump is a disruptor. Maybe he is going in a different direction that could actually work. What do you think?
Well, he has not laid out any kind of strategy for how to get from where we are as of this evening to where we will have a more effective agreement. What he has done is to poke the eyes out of the International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors. If Iran does resume uranium enrichment as a result of the U.S. action, and they kick out the inspectors, we will not have the capability to address any of the issues that Mr. Netanyahu was concerned about when he recycled 10-year-old information last week.
We're not quite at that stage, though, yet, are we? Iran is sounding positive about negotiating with the other countries in this deal. Is it salvageable without the United States, realistically?
The United States is one party of the 7 parties to this deal, and it cannot by itself destroy the deal. What it did today in withdrawing from the deal is to violate the deal. The document says nothing about withdrawal. You can either respect it or you can violate it, and the U.S. chose to be the first country to violate it. Now, that is a very severe injury to the deal. It is not necessarily fatal. And it is important, I think, for especially the European Union parties to come together and to say, we would have responded very strongly if Iran had been the first to violate the deal. We will respond just as strongly if the United States is the first to violate the deal. For the credibility of the EU, it's important that they stop, take a deep breath, and think about the best possible means to preserve all of the positive aspects of the JCPOA.
When we look at what Donald Trump is achieving with North Korea, the first U.S. leader to meet a North Korean leader in such a long time, and the possibilities, the impact that that will have on North Korea's nuclear hopes and aspirations, is there a chance that the president does know what he's doing with Iran?
I think there's little chance of that. I support the president taking the risk of meeting with Mr. Kim of North Korea. It's important that we stop and talk to the North Koreans instead of continuing a sleepwalk into some kind of conflict in Korea. But the president has not yet accomplished anything that other presidents could have done with North Korea. Other presidents turned down invitations to meet with the North Korean leader. I hope he accomplishes something. I support him in his efforts to make something positive happen in North Korea, but in my strong opinion, his actions today to destroy U.S. credibility in international agreements will not make his job in North Korea any easier.
Thomas Countryman from the Arms Control Association, many thanks.
Thank you.
Indonesian scientists have launched the largest ever study into whether tiny plastic particles can affect human health. They are investigating the presence of plastic in seafood, and they hope to establish if there's any evidence that ingesting small pieces of plastic is harmful. Our science editor David Shukman has been to Semarang on the north coast of Java in Indonesia, one of the country's worst hit by plastic pollution.
A journey through the mangrove swamps on the coast of Indonesia. Plastic hangs from the branches and lies trapped in the roots. Indonesia sends huge volumes of plastic into the ocean. Only China releases more. There's so much, it jams our boat's propeller. The problem is that when plastic flows down the rivers and reaches the ocean, it doesn't just disappear. What happens is that the plastic breaks down into ever smaller fragments, what are called microplastics. So even though there's an effort to clear up, the legacy of plastic continues. So we head to the local fish farms, because research in Britain shows that microplastics can get into seafood. I joined scientist Ineke Hantoro as she investigates a key question, whether eating plastic is harmful. She's working with local fishermen. They collect samples for her to take away for analysis.
We eat the fish every day, and we don't want to get a plastic into our body due to eating the fish. So we want to see whether it's safe enough to eat the fish.
A microscope shows a plastic fragment found in seafood. It's a couple of millimeters long. Scientists want to establish a safe level for microplastics, in case we later find out that they're harmful. Ultimately, plastic is going to keep accumulating and entering the ocean unless two key things happen: setting up a proper system for handling waste, and also seeing a complete change of attitude among people, businesses and the authorities. And even if the larger pieces are cleared up, the microplastics will drift around for decades. David Shukman, BBC News, Indonesia.
David's report is on our website from Rico in Singapore, from me in London, and the whole Newsday team. Bye-bye.